Hello and welcome to episode 82 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today we're going to be talking about how beating yourself up might help you be successful at work. However, there's one area where it doesn't work, and that is when it comes to feeling confident and growing your professional confidence. So, many of the people who I work with and many professionals will say that beating themselves up or some version of that, right, whatever you call it, kind of fear based, punishing, kind of whipping yourself into shape, always noticing the gap instead of the gain, you may have used that as a tactic or as a way of being successful in your career to date. And it might have worked. It definitely worked for me in the early part of my career where I was incredibly self critical, doubting. I had not perfect standards. I'm not really a perfectionist, but I had high standards and I would beat myself up terribly if I didn't meet them. I was very ambitious and I could always see the negatives, but struggled to kind of see the positives. I was like a fear based leader of myself, if we're going to call it that. I would think that being, fairly self punishing and kind of whipping myself into shape was really the way to go in terms of how I needed to be managed in order to be motivated, in order to be successful, in order to do well. And to be honest, I'm not sure whether I ever really thought that through in terms of a conscious decision. And I don't think most people do. But maybe you're like me in that you just adopted that as a default, as a way of kind of managing yourself, as a way of improving yourself, as a way of getting yourself to grow and to be successful in your career. And you know what? It might have worked for you. You may have done what I did in terms of gone on to do interesting jobs and got promotions and climbed the ranks. That kind of fear-based leadership, beating yourself up, the management technique of beating yourself up, it can work. So many of the professionals who come to me are already very successful, but they come because they want help with their confidence. And for some of them, for a lot of them actually, just like I had to learn, they have to learn a completely different way of managing themselves in order to feel confident and calm and in control. And that style of management that they have to learn is very different than the one that they might have been using to date, which in some ways has worked really successfully for them. Now, if you think about the ways that you could manage somebody, and I'm going to use two sort of extremes here. Yes, there are many, many, many ways. But the first one I'm thinking of is the kind of critical, doubting, setting extremely high standards, nothing really ever being good enough, focusing on the negatives, giving only feedback on the negatives, never really giving someone acknowledgement or praise, but just always, reading them the riot act, telling them that they better prove themselves, that nothing's quite good enough, even when something goes well. That's one way of managing somebody. And another way might be supportive, encouraging, understanding. It might be helping people to see what their strengths are, picking them up when they're down, acknowledging the things that they do, making sure that you feed back on things that they've done well as learning points, right? Those two ways of managing are maybe a bit opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're completely different ways of managing. However, both of those ways might be effective if you're trying to get a particular thing done. So hear me out here. I'm not saying that I think that being critical and beating people up and all of that is a great way of managing. But both of those styles of managing might be effective. So let's say you have a team of people And you want that team to deliver a particular piece of work by the end of the financial year. So let's say by the end of March, you expect them to have finished this particular piece of work. And you've got to do a little bit of management and leadership in order to make that happen. There's totally different ways that you could go about that. One of the ways is more of a fear-based approach. So you could read them the riot act, you could tell them, I expect this in or else. You can threaten them. You can, undermine them. You could even cajole them. You could micromanage them. You could point out everything that they've done wrong so far, right? And whilst that might not feel great for that team, it may have the desired result. Like that may be enough to get that team to get that piece of work finished and over the line. And they may do it because they're afraid. They may be afraid for their job. They may be afraid for their reputation. They may be afraid of the, potential fallout if they don't deliver it on time. So you may, by managing them in that way, actually maybe mission accomplished. You may be like, well, that worked. That piece of work got over the line just like I wanted. Another way of approaching how you would manage that team to complete that piece of work is by taking the time to notice what they'd already done, give them some encouragement, provide them with some support. Maybe you're gonna, say, where can I help you here? Is there something that you're struggling with? Would you like to talk it through? So it may be that you give them practical support, but it may just be that you're a kind of listening ear. And that's a totally different way of managing or leading a team. And that way might also work. That team might also get that piece of work over the line. So both ways may result in a successful outcome. Like if we're being, like results focused or outcome focused, you might say, well, those two methods are equal because if we're focusing on the end result or the outcome, both of those ways of managing that team created the outcome we wanted. Both of them delivered the piece of work on time. Great. So in theory, both of those management styles get a tick. However, when you're considering confidence, both management styles do not work equally. So think about the team who had the first style applied to them, the kind of fear-based, the threatening, that first difficult one. They may complete the piece of work, but they're going to be left more likely in a state of fear, in a state of anxiety, in a state of worry. They may lose some of their motivation. They're probably not going to feel more confident than when they started that piece of work. The reality is that they're probably going to feel less confident. They're probably going to feel less secure, even if they actually manage to complete that piece of work and it's okay. The best that they might get is a sigh of relief or gratefulness that it's over. But they're probably not going to be, reveling in their success or feeling happy about going on to the next piece of work. And you may know this because you may have worked in an environment like that or in a team like that for a boss like that. It damages people's confidence in the long term if that's the kind of environment they work in. And yes, as we can see from that example, they may still do good work within that environment. Within that environment, you still may have done well in theory. You may have hit your targets. You may have been promoted. However, being in that environment is going to have a negative impact. And often what I see is that negative impact is on people's confidence. It's on people's self-belief. When people work in that kind of environment, they become hyper aware of any error. They become hyper aware of any criticism. They're more likely to compare themselves. They're more likely to, give themselves a hard time, which is interesting, right? Because what's happening on the outside to them is also, in my experience, more likely to kind of be reflected and start happening on the inside too. So, whilst beating that team up to get them over the line might have worked for that piece of work, it is very unlikely to produce a team that feels confident about what it is that they're doing. The same is true when you're thinking about the kind of environment that you may be unknowingly creating for yourself. So, earlier in the episode, I said that many people who work with me are more senior than junior. They've done well in their careers. They've already got promotions, lead teams, lead departments, are directors. Not all of my clients, but a fair number of them, the majority, are already senior. And for many of them, they would admit that one of the ways in which they've been successful is not only to be really technically good at what they do, because they are, but they've used this kind of punishing, critical, comparing, taskmaster style management on themselves. And they'll say, well, that's one of the reasons that I've been successful. I've whipped myself into shape. That's what's motivated me. That's like the fuel that's got me here. So it's worked to a degree. Being like that with themselves, managing and leading themselves like that has worked when you look at their CV. But where it often hasn't worked, where that management style completely collapses, is when you're thinking about confidence. So if you come to me and say, I don't feel as confident as I want to at work, I'm going to ask you about how you're managing and leading yourself. And I'm going to want to get to the bottom of whether you're using that critical, like army major, shouting, doubting, comparing style with yourself or not. Because I know what the impact of that kind of style of management and leadership on a person is. They lose their confidence. And that's true whether you're talking about the way they're managed by others or the way they're managed by themselves. So even if somebody's got a really great boss, a supportive team, they're in a great environment, if they're leading themselves like with that deranged kind of army major style, they are going to feel less confident than they could. They're going to feel more anxious than they should. They're going to feel more worry than they could. They're going to be more prone to over-checking, overworking, overcompensating because they're being beaten up, because they're being compared, because they're being doubted, because they're being given very little emotional support, but everything they do wrong is going to be pointed out to them come hell or high water. Of course, they're not going to feel as confident as they could. Of course, they're going to worry. And many people respond to that by over preparing, over checking, overworking, over pleasing. It's just a natural byproduct of being in a critical, demanding, difficult environment. It makes complete sense. But because for most of us it's happening in the inside, on the inside, in the confines of our own mind, nobody else really notices. And maybe we don't even really notice. Most first calls I have with a client, I'm explaining to them, this is what's happening because of how you're managing yourself. And if you want to feel more confident, we have to change that. And you might say to me, do you know what? Beating myself up and doing that really harsh style of leadership, it's worked so far and I'd like to carry on with it. I'd say, okay, go ahead, but you are not going to feel more confident because that's what's creating the low confidence in the first place. Only if someone's willing to try or even contemplate a potentially different way of managing and leading themselves can we start to rebuild somebody's professional confidence. And I know that now from years of experience working with people and from going through my own work too. So, if you've been leading yourself one way your whole career, even if that has created a lot of success for you, but you're listening to this podcast, which indicates that for whatever reason you want to feel more confident at work, you need to consider that confidence comes when you're feeling more safe, more secure, when you're feeling supported, when you're feeling encouraged. And that only comes from managing yourself in a particular way. It doesn't come from you being beaten up and chastised and criticised and compared. How could it? So that's what I have for you today. There's different ways of leading and managing yourself. But if you want to feel more confident, there's really only one way. And that's the supportive, encouraging, understanding way. And don't hear that and think, oh, that's just soft and I'd never get anything done. And, I'd be like, I'd just lay around all day. That really isn't the case as far as what I've seen. And if your brain's going there, if your brain's like doing that argument with me and being like, yeah, but Anna, I would just lay around and I wouldn't do anything. If somebody's just going to manage me like that, and if I'm going to manage my own brain like that, I'm just going to be like a lazy lump that never does anything. Well, ask yourself this. In order to be successful within your work, do you need your boss to criticize you, cajole you, doubt you, compare you, beat you up after every mistake, and never acknowledge anything good that you do, but constantly give you negative feedback? Do you need that in order to do well? Most of you are going to say, no, I would feel terrible if my boss treated me like that. It would be worse for me overall, not better. So, no different than the boss that lives in your own head as the boss that you have or wish you had. I'm yet to meet anyone who answered that question and said, actually, I do need someone to beat me up in order to do well. And, maybe you're out there. maybe there are people like that, but I don't think it's the majority of us. The majority of us know that we need support, we need encouragement, we need understanding. Yeah, sometimes we might need a kick up the butt, and that can be done in a way that doesn't destroy somebody's confidence, as it can by you. I feel like I'm a bit ranty on this episode, but I really want to impress on you that I just think you deserve good leadership from yourself because you're your closest boss. You're the one that's there 24/7, whatever job, whatever moves you make in your career, you're the one that's there. And I just think that because you are a person, you deserve somebody who treats you with a bit of respect. And that includes you. But I also know that if you want to feel more confident at work, you need to be treated with respect as a baseline, as a minimum. So it is a means to an end, as well as just what you deserve. All right, run over. I will see you in next week's episode. But if you haven't yet taken the quiz to find out whether you're stuck in a low confidence cycle, then head on over to the show notes now and tap the link, go through the quiz, and I will send you some personalized results to tell you whether or not you're in a low confidence cycle and give you some instant support. There's a video and there's some tips and tools to help you start to move away from that low confidence cycle and into a high confidence cycle straight away. And some of the stuff that we've been talking about on the podcast today is relevant to that low confidence cycle and a high confidence cycle. Think about if you were managed in the fear, scary way, you're more likely to be in a low confidence cycle. And that includes if you're managed by you in that way. And if you're managed in a supportive, understanding, encouraging way, you're more likely to be in a high confidence cycle. And that includes managed by you. So head on over to the show notes, click the link. You can take the quiz in like 3 minutes, and it's going to give you instant personalized results. And I'll see you in next week's episode. Bye.